Hello there, beautiful people. We are about to begin, I don't know, probably my favorite part of the daily. Part number 3, because it means we're still going. It's daily number 411, where we learn to be a better gamer, and we're taking a look at your late game examples so we can talk a little bit about some of the problems that can crop up in the late game and sort of how to overcome them. One of the big things that was popping up in the extended break that we just had between part 2 and 3 was why not look at ultra top pro players to do it. They're obviously really good at late game. Wouldn't that be more educational? Though that they're great examples of what to do, I always think it's so important to know what not to do as well. It's very easy to see a situation that's good and say, oh, I totally get that, cool. And then you're playing, and then you try to expand this way, and suddenly you're in a weird spot that you haven't seen in one of the pro matches, and you have no intuition on what to go on, and it can feel all so just thinking of having played StarCraft competitively for like more than a decade, the way that I discovered it was by being in a lot of situations that I just hated, and I was like, oh, I hate this one too. And after a while, I just avoided everything I hated, and I was happy. And then my late game was decent. So yeah, I want to help try to get you to avoid that process of doing what I do and just smashing my head against pavement for a long time until I finally learned some of these things. Ugh, oh god, it was so vicious. I distinctly remember this one game where I actually just could not get a third, could not get a third up at all. I mean, I must have played this map 400 times, and I still could not figure out how to get a third base up. And then I just asked myself, what's the easiest one to defend? And I stopped doing what I saw other people do and just did what made the most sense. Who'd have thought? Who'd have thought? So I want to just give an extra special compliment to Sane Galton, who's playing against Roxor. Our good friend Sane, I hope I'm saying his name right, he is playing just a rematch game against this guy Roxor in custom, and they don't even know each other. And look at this. St. Galton just like complimenting his opponent, and in fact, in the description, when Sane emailed me, he was like, I was playing as the wonderful Terran Roxor. Yeah! Yes! I love that! I love that so much. Being happy to be playing. Seeing your opponent crush your force and going, whoa, that's totally nice. Yes! So, huge mad props to him. We're going to see him continue this awesomeness. So, okay, we're starting at the 16-minute mark again. Let's go ahead and ask ourselves our first question. Do we have all the things we want? Well, we have our third up. We're getting a fourth. We seem to have these macro hatches up and running. We seem to have, oh, it looks like we're almost done with 2-2. We have a ridiculously fast hive. Wow, 16 minutes and it's done. And our greater spire's almost finished. Things are looking quite good, right? We do want to be a little bit careful, though. We want to be just a smidge careful to ask things like, why is our money high? I think that our money is high for the pure and simple reason that we have a few too many excess larvae, and we really need to be building some more zerglings out of them. Now, I want you to look at this picture, and I want you to ask, is there something that's missing here? I mean, I don't think this fourth could be up any faster. I mean, we're getting 15 infestors out at once. I mean, do we have pathogen glands? That's something important to check. Yes, we do. Hell, we even have these defensive structures up for drops. But you have to be real careful when you say, sweet, I have everything that I need. Rather than give you an answer right now, even though I see many people typing it up in the chat, I want you to feel what will go wrong. Now, first of all, this push comes up, and we have a reasonable force to be able to defend it. I will say that Sane Galton in this spot, whenever there's a lot of tanks, the best technique when you have this infestor force is to lob a couple infested Terrans, lob a couple more, and then have the Zerglings spring into action. Lobbing the infested Terrans up to soak up the first rounds of tank fire so these Zerglings can really get in there and do their dirty work. Trying to fungal tanks is just not going to work. I think Sane Galton is unable to really defend this easily because he just marches his Zerglings in without really using a lot of infested Terrans. But are you noticing that oh my gosh, yeah, our Greater Spire is done, and we didn't have any Corruptors. Ooh, gosh, we better hurry up and get those. Okay, so I'm going to ×4 the replay. We're at ×4 speed, ×4 speed. Galtan is trying to hold back his pretty high energy infestors. Ooh, we can only get, like, 3 Broodlords up. We're still kind of managing to push. Okay, let's kind of begin working our way forward, and yeah, you're noticing that it looks awkward, it feels sort of awkward. The Marines wander up and kill off 1, almost 2 Broodlords. This has all happened within the span of 3 minutes. So I'm going to come back here and talk a little bit about this phase in the game in relation to this transition. Anytime the thing that you're transitioning to feels weak, something like, you know, Broodlords cropping up like this, it's important that you didn't go for the transition too fast, that you made sure you had the appropriate resources for it. In this circumstance, I think the big thing that Saint Galtan should have done is that we have 15 infestors coming out. Why don't we make that 12 infestors and try to get those corruptors up a little bit sooner? And then our transition ends up being really, really, really nice. I think that what happens very, very frequently is that, you know, you'll be playing and you'll find a mixture that works. Like, let's say something like you've been having trouble and against Terrans, and you've been getting a Colossus up. How wonderful the Colossus feels. So then you start getting the Colossus a little faster, and it's feeling really good. You start getting it faster, and it's still pretty good. And then you get it too fast, and it's hard to tell if you're doing something wrong. It just feels dangerous all the time. Like, Galtan is getting his Broodlords up so stupidly fast, and that is really good if you can pull it off properly, but there's a little bit too much gas that's been dumped into the infestors. This is, I guess what I would call a poorly funded transition. It's a transition that we went for too quickly. We didn't have everything we needed for the transition before we went to it. Everyone knows that Broodlords are great units, and Broodlord Infestor is your ideal army, but getting there can be very, very, very dangerous. Notice that if we somehow had 9 Broodlords here, we would have mowed through those Marines, we would have mowed through these tanks, and then boom, 3rd safe, boom, 4th base safe. But look at what happens when we begin trying to advance forward. We're kind of having these dangerous exchanges. Maybe you've been in this position where you have, I don't know, 20 Marines and 1 tank, and you can't seem to push against the Zerg. Maybe you're a Zerg like Galtan, and you have just 3 Broodlords. The Protoss player who seems to only have 1 Colossus. The Terran player who seems to have a ton of Marine Marauder and 1 Medevac with his maxed army. There's that slight imbalancedness there to those late transitions. And just because we didn't quite have a good platform, we didn't quite have a good launch pad for these Broodlords, now all of a sudden we're losing our 3rd base, when we shouldn't have lost that in the first place. A couple infestors sacrifice themselves just to prove that tanks do indeed do a lot of damage. Excellent. We're going to go ahead and speed things up a little bit. Saint Galtan goes ahead and does this really wickedly good counterattack that ends up doing a pretty significant amount of damage. But 2 things that I want to point out with this attack. One, and most obviously, it doesn't go for this completely vulnerable expansion. Even when you're getting these sort of glimpse of glory, sort of, oh, maybe I'll win this game type counterattacks, it's so easy to go for the jugular. Once we're done killing off all these structures out here, we get over-eager, and we just sprint right on up into his main base. By the way, there's an attack going over here that's not going very well, but we're just going to ignore it for the most part. Galtan takes his Zerglings and he really drills up into the main, begins killing off workers here. But killing off workers is not as important as controlling your opponent's expansion count. I'm sure you've been in the situation where your opponent has 10 bases and you keep killing off the workers and it doesn't seem to do much of anything. Killing off expansions is really, really important. So that's the first point to make, is that, you know, when you're in a tight spot and you get these counterattacks where suddenly you're going, oh my god, I really actually might have the chance to win this game, you still have to be going for the expansions. Just killing off units and buildings is just not anywhere remotely close as important to killing off his expansion. The second problem that I have here is that our Zerg buddy Sane gets himself in a situation where the game has evened up a good bit. It has indeed gotten quite a bit more even. So, in this spot, it's easy to tell yourself that, I don't want to say tell yourself, but it's easy to feel like, oh, okay, if I pause right now, I see that the game state is fairly even. In the unit station, we both have a pretty reasonable amount of stuff. No one has more than the other. Actually, we're probably stronger with our 74 Zerglings. And to say, okay, I did everything right. We definitely made a lot of correct decisions, but that moment with the Broodlords, where we got the almost no money to be able to do it, I want you to always be aware when you're doing a big transition like that, whether you have the resources for it. For instance, right now, we have the Roach Warren. Again, this game is a good example of thinking about transitions in the late game. In this particular circumstance, it looks like Sane wants to transition to roaches. Is that right or wrong? I'm going to put it aside for a second. First question, do we have the resources to be able to support it? You bet your ass we do have the resources to be able to support it. In fact, we have a ton of hatches. We don't quite have enough larvae on them, but we can easily begin to churn out a lot of roaches really, really quickly. Is it the right choice? I would argue probably not. We didn't ask ourselves the question of what is our ideal late game composition. Something like Zergling, Infestor, Ultralisk. Totally reasonable to be aggressive. Even just Zergling Infestor to be really aggressive. Our ultra late thing will probably have Broodlords and Infestors and Corruptors. I actually feel like Broodlord, Corruptor, Infestor is something I really personally just dream about in this matchup as Zerg. But the whole transition to roaches is a different, I would describe as potential concern that you'd have in the late game with your transitions. With this Broodlord thing we saw early on, it was lack of resources. In this situation, it's that I just don't feel like the roaches are going to contribute all that much. You can say something like, that late game transition I'm not going to do because I don't see anyone else do it. And if no pros are going for roaches, then I probably shouldn't go for roaches too. I think that's a pretty reasonable way to begin your logic. But also, you should ask yourself, what are the roaches specifically here doing? What are they really for? I mean, the Zerglings we have fully upgraded, are super fast, are really only mineral units, giving us the gas to do whatever the hell we want. So these seems to make a lot of sense with the Infestors. The Roaches, though, are those good against the tanks? Not really. Against the Marines, pretty decent, but our fungal growth and our Marines are good against that. I'm not quite feeling the Roaches for an ultra-late game mix when we have 8 geysers up and running. As we can see, the Zergling counterattacking, doing oh so great. And again, we're in a situation where we're pretty even, and we can feel comfortable to stop our analysis right now, clear our mind, come back, and then begin looking at this game again all over. Again, we don't want to look at this situation and say, we really should be behind as this Zerg player because of what happened with the Broodlords. We really should be. Don't make that mistake. It's so easy to just think of what happened in the past. But honestly, Zerg's looking wonderful right now. He's looking to be in a great position. He's even going to kill off 2 expansions with this wonderful wraparound. Cool. Super cool. And all of a sudden, we kind of have a good game again. The Zerglings are going to go and do their suicidal thing. How sad. Now, it's very easy to look up here and see that the money's really, really high. And obviously, guys, your money, man, you got a macro. Man, you got to hurry up. As fun as it is to say, I think that almost everyone is aware that you should be macroing. And if your macro's bad, and that's something you want to work on, good. Keep working on it. I think that will only improve your gameplay. In this specific game, though, I don't want to talk so much about macro because it's so easy to look at this situation and to say something like, oh yeah, Zerg, well, look at his money. He should just make a bunch of Ultralisks and win. But that would be a very easy way to overlook this whole notion of expanding and controlling expansions, which is always the core thing going on. Where's a safe place to expand? Here and here. Why is that? Because we have a really big ground army, and we don't really have a lot of air units that can deal with a ton of drops all over the place. For instance, we'd have a hard time defending this expansion and this expansion, because they're along the edges. They're far away from our big middle army. So I love the fact that Sane is going ahead and taking these two inner expansions. I like the fact that he's trying to watch these outer edges as well, just trying to control that space a little bit. The decisions of where he's expanding, I think, are delightful. We make a little bit of a miss attack up here, and now we're really getting a chance to see why the Roach transition probably not the correct one to go for in this circumstance. Our ultra late mix should probably have Broodlords, Ultralisks, Infestors, Hell, all three. The most basic mixture for Zerg in this matchup late game is the Broodlord, Infestor, Ultralisk, or excuse me, the Broodlord, Infestor, Corruptor mixture. The most standard of all. So now that this thing is going on, we're starting to see how our, drops up here, though they feel fun and are doing a little bit of damage, our space control here definitely helping out a little bit. Still not nearly as important as our late game composition and how it's going to help break these areas of expansions. Now to talk a little bit about what Roxor is doing that's just fantastic. He's hanging out in mid and just trying to kill off this expansion. He's not doing a huge drop up at the top left. He's not trying to, do weird pushes up this top lane. He's just staying in the middle because he has two expansions in the middle. Cool, look at the nice line of Terran and the fact that all the expansions are behind that. I would say that the one thing that almost certainly lost our Zerg player the game was his late game composition choices. I think he did a good job with choosing where to expand, having his units logically placed to support those expansions. But I really would say that the really difficult part here is just having the appropriate composition. And again, if you're ever feeling lost, steal it from a pro. Yeah. And let me just point out why this is the greatest thing ever, the greatest thing of all time. Look at the manner. Well played, dude. Don't believe you're gold. You're way good. Oh, let's play games. That would be awesome. Cool. Thanks for playing. Had way fun. Same, sir. Awesome style. Oh, yes, that's awesome. Do that. If someone's crushing you, don't go, you suck and you cheat and what you do is cheap. Ask them, what is it that I'm doing? What should I be doing better? Do you want to do a practice game? Could I try something against you just for a game or two? You're awesome. Do more of that. So again, to recap, and sadly I've been going on for way too long, so I don't think I'm going to have time for questions today. But the three basic ideas that we got the chance to explore are, do we have everything we need going into the late game? Where are some stuff that's missing? Talked a lot about that in part 1. In part 2, or actually number 2, is expanding and attacking and how those relate. Creating an imaginary wall of where you're moving your units and expanding all behind that a lot. Looking at where you're attacking to indicate where you should expand. Looking at where you're expanding to indicate where you should attack. We talked a lot about that in part 2 and saw in this mech game where we really kind of screwed ourselves by forcing ourselves to expand in a or forcing ourselves to attack in a big wide open region because it's the only place that would defend our expansions. And the third thing is this late game composition that we got the chance to look at a lot in part number 3. Are we getting the right late game units? Do we have the right timing on that? Is it a little too early, a little too late? Do we have all those units there? I think Sane was getting the right units, but didn't quite have them up enough around the 18-minute mark, and that's what ended up with this push that, quite honestly, busted down his third and almost lost the game for him. And then transition into roaches didn't end up being the most effective use of those late game resources, which made it a little hard for him to control things properly. So hopefully these examples have gotten a chance to sort of spark interest in playing longer and longer games, and more importantly, how to look at your old long games and say, I now see what I did wrong there. Always remember the biggest thing ever, period, is the expanding and attacking and how those relate. Expanding and attacking and how those relate. Let me once again announce that next Tuesday there will be a stream-a-thon for Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, which is an action RPG with a really cool juggling combat system. I think the links for the demo are in my Twitch TV thing right below, twitch.tv/day9tv. So if you haven't played the game, you can play it. This is just a taste of who will be part of the stream-a-thon with me. We have people like Ciderhelm, Lore, Total Biscuit, DJ Wheat, and Control, JP McDaniel, Pomfit Dude, Forecourt Jester, Travis, Chiefsaid Noir, Zoe, Toby Wan, and more. Wah! Yeah! So that's going to be happening for like 8 hours on next Tuesday. So there will be no Newbie Tuesday next week. But don't forget, Fun Day Monday next week is the Alphabetical Free-For-All. Please submit to me a game where you play free-for-all in BattleNet, and you must kill your opponents in alphabetical order. Awesome. I'm going to go. I'm going to go, you guys. That was a long amount of daily. Long, 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 long.